There's a lot to talk about in Houston football. Back-to-back division titles and back-to-back divisional round appearances for the Houston Texans. However, will that mean more success to come? And will C.J. Stroud bounce back in year 3 with Houston? All of that and more here on Chase's Sports News. Here on Chase's Sports News, we are previewing each of the 32 teams' NFL seasons before things do get started. And today we preview the Houston Texans' upcoming season with a very special guest, a longtime Houston Texans reporter, Aaron Wilson. Aaron, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. Obviously, a lot to talk about with Houston football, and there are very few who know Houston football better than you. You've been doing this for a while. I know, Houston Texans minicamp ended a little while ago. What stood out to you from minicamp when you were there?
One of the big standouts was a player not a lot of people are talking about, a position I think is one of the more shaky spots on an otherwise strong roster. That was Cade Stover. He's a second-year tight end from Ohio State. He's had a great rapport with C.J. Stroud, obviously with them both being former Buckeyes. But he looked really explosive to me. I was very impressed. Another player that I think has gotten even better, which should be scary for offenses, is Will Anderson Jr. Will's been working on some new moves, and he was testing them out against the Texans' revamped offensive line, and they couldn't block him. And it was pretty rough over there for Blake Fisher against Will, and he was in the backfield constantly. And I think this is the final year where he can, before he's eligible for a contract extension, kind of like same thing for CJ Stroud on the other side of the football. But what I anticipate, is the Texans kind of a Derek Stingley Jr. situation for both of those guys. They're respectively CJ and Will, the second and third overall picks of that draft. And yeah, I think that'll be their big offseason project next year, is signing both of those guys to, big time deals. But yeah, I was really impressed with Will. Cade Stover. I thought that, you look at wide receiver Jaden Higgins, who's a new player, their top draft pick, and they like him so much they signed him to a fully guaranteed, unprecedented second round deal. I thought those were among the standouts.
Absolutely, and I think when you see a guy like a Cade Stover having that connection with C.J. Stroud, I mean, quarterback, receiver tight end connection is obviously so important to an offense. And I mean, last season the Texans, they were once again a playoff team. They won the division record wise and production wise. It didn't feel like there was a drop off, but it didn't feel like C.J. Stroud was at that same level. And overall, this team just felt less dangerous, if that makes sense. Just kind of in competition in the AFC. What do you think kind of contributed to that slight drop off from 24 compared to 23?
Yeah, and I mean, slight is you're being kind. Really, it was a significant drop off in terms of efficiency, in terms of being a real constant scoring threat. And then there were some ugly, ugly moments, like you remember the Detroit game where they couldn't run the football, and there were other games like the playoff game where CJ sacked 8 times and hit 14 times overall. And if the pass protection had even just been average, not awful, then maybe they beat the Chiefs. The game was not completely one-sided. They were competitive with the Chiefs, or obviously not where they used to be. They're kind of a little bit declined. But I looked at everything that happened and I thought, wow, there's a problem with the play calling. There's a problem with the lack of adjustments. There's a personality conflict between the offensive line coaches. There's, I think, some misplaced finger pointing at Laramie Tunsil. I know they traded him, but I can say behind the scenes, Laramie is so well respected and liked. It was, he did have some penalty issues, but mostly you just had poor performances by some of the draft picks from Nick Caserio, like Juice Scruggs, notably. And, Blake Fisher wasn't ready as a rookie to be a starter. I thought that Shaq Mason declined incredibly. He aged poorly that last year. He gave up over 10 sacks at right guard. That's unheard of, to have a guard give up over 10 sacks. You're playing right there, kind of like in a phone booth, and you're flanked by a center and a tackle, and they're attacking you that badly. And he's a really great lineman at one point, but yeah, he hit a wall. I thought the protection scheme didn't work. And, they fired Bobby Slowick. They fired Chris Strauss, the offensive line coach. They replaced him with an in-house guy, Cole Popovich, who used to work for the Patriots and worked with Nick
Right.
Cayley in New England. There's so many issues on offense. It's too many issues, and it's the really important ones. I don't know that CJ got worse. I think he got hit a lot. If you take away, some of those sacks and, he maybe has more time to make a play, there's not much any quarterback can do when they're on their back. I've covered, the NFL for a long time, so I've covered a lot of the great Tom Brady years. I'm talking like the early 2000s.
Right.
And so sometimes he'd play Baltimore, and guys like Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs, they would light him up. And any quarterback can be rendered ordinary when they're on their back. It's just, a fact of life in the NFL or any level of football.
Do you believe it
And
was the offensive line that contributed to Stroud's increase in turnovers and just
yeah,
overall was he just regression?
I don't know if he regressed in terms of accuracy or ability to throw. I think he became gun shy. I think that it was, a direct result of poor offensive line play and poor play calling. They never went in motion like pre-snap. Everybody knew the plays. It was, I mean, I just think we wouldn't be having the conversation about whether, obviously, there's a kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing here, but
Right.
you wouldn't, people wouldn't think that CJ had played worse, in my opinion, having watched every snap and every practice and gone to every game and watched this and knowing, some inside information about the problems, the dynamic of the offensive room and the lack of confidence in Slowick and the votes of no confidence from the players, and eventually DeMeco Ryans making a tough decision, having to fire his friend. I think you've got to look at the facts. They overhauled their offensive line. They changed receiver a little bit, but they overhauled their offensive line. They fire the offense coordinator. They fire the offensive line coach. So obviously the Texans, who know it better than I do, because it's their team, they're saying that's the reason. They're not pointing a finger at
Right.
CJ. Now they're changing it to where CJ is going to have more autonomy and ownership of the offense in terms of changing the protection scheme and being able to audible more, things that Slowick wasn't letting him do. So I know Kaylee's a rookie offense coordinator, just like Slowick was, but Kaylee comes from two different systems with Sean McVay, with Josh McDaniels. My opinion is based a lot on like Kaylee, that what I've heard about Kaylee, that Kaylee is a really smart young coach. And so far, CJ and him, I just think it's a better mesh personality wise. They are off to a good start. And like I reported in the spring, CJ's shoulder, that wasn't a big deal either. He lifted a lot of weights. He threw a lot. He overtrained a little bit, and he was a little sore. Yeah, to me, yeah, I would just be logical about it. If they're firing people and replacing ad hoc the offensive line with only two returning starters now, and one of those guys playing a different position, Titus Howard moving to right guard. Well, what do the facts tell you? And the facts tell me I'm
Right.
just very logical, and then I go off of what am I hearing from players, off the record. And that's how I base a lot of my reporting, just on information I might hear. If you fire the OC, you're kind of blaming the OC. You're not blaming your quarterback.
Sure.
But
But I mean,
long answer that no, I don't necessarily buy into the theory of regression. I think regression statistically, sure, all those things are true, but there's a really logical reason for it.
you talked about kind of changing up the offensive line, changing the scheme a little bit. Do you expect Stroud to return to that elite level that he was at a few years ago, or do you still believe this O line will still give him some issues?
They're not that talented. I mean, there's a chance that there still is some issues because, you look at this line, there's no one that's been to a recent Pro Bowl. There's no one, Laken Tomlinson went to Pro Bowl a long time ago. He's kind of toward the latter half of his career. Cam Robinson is a very serviceable and respected left tackle, but not Laramie Tunsil talent level.
Sure.
They've downgraded with the talent. They just think it's going to be more cohesive. You're putting a lot of faith in a lot of change. Normally, that much change doesn't work out all at once. Maybe they get better as the year goes on. And they had problems blocking Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson at the mini camp, and they might have more problems when they play teams like the Rams or Jared Verse, and there's other good pass rushers obviously on the schedule. I don't think everything's going to be fixed Rome wasn't built in a day, but I think that they'll be better coached. They like their coach. There's more buy-in with him, with Popovich, and I think that gives it a fighting chance to be successful, but doesn't necessarily guarantee success, right? Because look at
Right.
the makeup of the offensive line. We're talking about competitions. We're talking about, is Jake Andrews going to be the center right now? It
Right.
looks like
Not,
he
not a
is.
recipe for success for sure.
No, I mean, maybe like I'm talking about lower expectations. If they were F or a D last year, get to a C or a C plus level. I don't see the potential for this to be a grade A blue chip offensive line. I don't think they have enough talented players. They need to invest in this. They've missed on the Mason trade and the contract. Titus Howard has not, I don't know if he's ever going to be Pro Bowl, but he had his ups and downs. They've put him in several positions. Juice Scruggs was picked in the second round. They traded up, and right now he's not a projected starter. So, and Blake Fisher was pretty bad in the playoff game. He gave up 3 sacks
Right.
to Chris Jones. So, he may even get beat out by Ariante Ursery, who I think is talented. I like the upside of Ursery, but he's a rookie. So it's hard to just say, okay, well, I know Ursery is going to be really good just because he blocked Abdul Carter very well in the Minnesota Penn State game. I, question any rookie's ability to necessarily just be like a surefire hit. This is a tough league. So he's talented. He is massive, and he moves very well. He runs a 5:01 40-yard dash at well over 300 pounds. He is a excellent athlete, and I like the upside a lot with Urser. He's a great kid, but he's not right now in the first 5. He's going to push for either left tackle or right tackle, and I think they want him to play eventually. But if Fisher isn't a good starter, and you picked him in the second round just last year, what does that say? So this is Nick Caceres drafted so well, but especially like on defense and hitting on the Stroud pick. But look at this group, and obviously another great draft pick was Nico Collins. But I have issue with the offensive line in terms of like
Sure.
looking at, can you really say that they're that talented? I don't think you can. I mean, I think it's kind of a a little bit of a leap to say, oh man, this is a big time offensive line.
Sure.
I think a lot to prove.
They absolutely have a lot to prove, and to win in the National Football League, I'm sure you would know this. You have to win at the line of scrimmage, and that's going to be so important, and particularly if you want Stroud to return to that elite level, as we were speaking about him having to deal with so much trouble on that offensive line. Before we do a quick schedule breakdown and kind of wrap up, I want to get your thoughts here. Obviously, Joe Mixon's in Houston. You also add Nick Chubb. Seeing what he could provide post injury. How do you think the running game will complement Stroud in the passing game?
Well, I think it takes a lot of pressure off him when you have a 1-2 tandem like Mixon and Chubb, 2 Pro Bowl guys, and they're big running backs, and literally physically, guys that are about the 230-pound range. They're downhill runners, but they also have some wiggle, especially Mixon. You saw all the touchdowns, how he finished against the Dallas Cowboys in particular, where he had 3 touchdown runs that night. I look at Chubb, obviously, the knee hurt him last year. He wasn't the same, but is 80% Nick Chubb a great change of pace back? And how often does the number 2 back really play?
Right.
We did have some mix and miss some time with high ankle sprains from these illegal hip drop tackles that they don't
Sure.
and flag during the game, but then they find the guys later. So it's like the point of emphasis isn't really working with the
Sure.
defenders, but and that's a beef the Texans rightfully have with the officiating. That said, the guys together, I think, can be a really good group. And what does that leave? Damian Pierce? Well, yeah, he's the kickoff returner. Obviously he's lost the number 2 running back job here with the addition of Chubb, making up to $5 million and signing this fairly big contract for a backup running back.
Sure.
I think it's going to be those guys, and there might be times where Chubb has to play, depending on if Joe can
Right.
really have this ankle thing figured out. Because Joe got hurt again in the spring, away from the facility working out, and then he didn't practice at all. But I'm told that his mobility is increasing, and he's expected to be ready at some point during training camp. I'm not really worried about Joe as far as like, is he going to be ready for the Rams game? It's more like, you may not be ready to practice on the first day, and that doesn't really matter to me with a proven player like Joe. But potentially a really great tandem, and it creates play action respect, and both those guys can catch. There's some good things there with Chubb and Mixon and Popovich, who we mentioned before. He has this long background with Kaylee, and they gave him an additional title, and they gave him a nice contract. He's the run game coordinator, which is not a title every team has. I know the Rams have done that, but he's the run game coordinator here, and he's going to have some say about how they put together the running portion of the game plan, and also obviously the blocking. Of course, that's his job, his number one job. But him and Kaylee are boys. They work together for Belichick, and they see a lot of things about football the same way. So I think that's kind of a little ace in the hole for the development of Kaylee, because he's got someone he really has this long background with, going back to his formative years in the NFL as a coach with the Patriots. And as much as the Sean McVay part is a big influence in recent years, that time with McDaniels, with Belichick, with Tom Brady, and these guys are winning Super Bowls, that really is a formative kind of thing for those guys.
Absolutely, and I'm excited to see what the rushing attack can provide. Real quick, we always do this with our season previews. I want to take a quick look here at schedule real quick. You look at Houston's schedule currently, what they could possibly do here. It's a first place schedule, but it doesn't look to be too challenging. 18th hardest in the NFL based off 2024 opponent win percentage, 4 primetime games in there, and an early week 6 bye that you should keep an eye on. Overall, when you look at the schedule, Aaron, what stands out to you?
Well, there's some easier stretches when you look at the schedule. They're going to be tested when they play teams like Baltimore, who they have been competitive against. When they play Buffalo, they beat actually last year. And then when you look at the Chiefs game, that's been the main thing they haven't been able to get past as far as the
No one
playoffs last
has. No
year.
one has.
Yeah,
Houston's
nobody
not
beats
alone there.
the Chiefs. Yeah, absolutely. But I see 10-7 projection. I have them at 11 wins, but some of the defining parts of the schedule, you have some West Coast travel, 2 trips to Los Angeles, one against the Chargers, who they beat in the playoffs, one to start the season against the Rams. They have a Seattle Monday night game. I think
Seattle on the
Seattle.
road, primetime. That's a tough game.
Yeah, it's a hard game. It's an underrated part of the schedule is Week 9 against Denver. Denver's really good.
Absolutely.
I think that's a problem. So.
And if the Texans do happen to be in a wild card situation, or even if Denver is in a division winning situation, that can have like tiebreaker implication in there as well.
100%. Yeah, I think that's going to be a game that's important in the schedule and determining them and the playoffs, all that stuff.
And I think that just kind of about the schedule as well. I think if you're this Houston team, I think that the NFC South or AFC South, excuse me, should be a division that they cruise by. They should very easily find a way to win that division. So I think that if you go 4-2 or 5-1 in your division, all you have to do is find a way to muster 5 more wins in your other 11 games and you get into the postseason. Now, obviously, that's not ideal if that's your performance out of division when you're going to go into the playoffs and not play any of your division foes. But
Right.
if you it's not, I think, as hard for the Texans to see that blueprint to at least again win the AFC South and get into the postseason, and then hope, as I have, you win your final 3 games and hopefully get hot, and then see if something can, some fire could be rekindled in Stroud and crew in the playoffs. But I think that has to be kind of your philosophy: is go 4-2 or 5-1 in your division and find 5 or 6 wins elsewhere, because that shouldn't be that difficult. That's about a 500 record the rest of the way.
100%. Yeah, well said, Jason. You look at the South. I always say things like this. I call them the kings of the AFC South. They just keep winning the South Division. I expect them to do that again. I think 5-1 or 6-0 is possible. It won't be as easy. I think Jacksonville's going to improve a little bit with Liam Cohen and what he'll do with Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas Jr., Trevor Lawrence. But I still think they're better than those teams. So, yeah, part of my projection is based on a high winning percentage within the South. And then we'll see. I mean, they're 0-6 all time in the obviously you don't just advance to the divisional round, you have to earn it. But that's my projection, is that they get back to that point. Whether they're going to win in the second round, their only team in the AFC has never been in the AFC title game. And that's kind of been a defining thing for the franchise that they're not successful in the postseason. And that's how you're judged, obviously, is postseason success. They are beyond tired of losing the divisional round. And they've done it each of the past 2 years under DeMeco Ryans, who's done a great job here. DeMeco's leadership
Right.
has been instrumental in the turnaround. And Nick Caserio, for the most part, having a lot of success with the personnel aspect of this. But yeah, they've got to be better in the clutch. And that's when I started looking at coaching and CJ's performance and, the blocking and all those things. So yeah, it's got to get better, Chase. It really does. Yeah, but and I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on this show.
Yes, and just one quick thing before we wrap up. You mentioned divisional round; they've never made the AFC title game. What is going to have to happen for them to take that next step, which I'm sure they're expecting, kind of in that locker room, or hoping for?
They have to take better care of the football in the playoffs. They have to block much better. CJ's got to be able to improvise when things break down better and take care of the ball. And then on defense, there have been some lapses, not huge lapses, but there have been some problems with some of these elite quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson. There's been some just okay performances, nothing really special. They haven't really rushed the passer all that well in some of these games too. So just really almost every area except for like the kicking game, it hasn't been really good enough. The kicking game was poor in the Chiefs game too. That was a bad performance by Kaimi Fairburns, ordinarily one of the better kickers. So
Sure.
but normally it's not the kicking game, but this time it was.
We're going to see a lot to talk about in Houston football. That's all the time we have for you today. Aaron Wilson, thank you so much for joining the show today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chase.
All right, let's do it. We're going to sign off right here. Again, only a few teams down with many more to go here at Chase's Sports News. We're previewing every team season before the NFL season does kick off. Stay tuned. You don't want to go anywhere. Signing off from Chase's Sports News. I'm your host, Chase Coburn.